I spent 3 years building a sales division from nothing. I hired the team. I landed the clients. I trained my younger brother from his first day on the job. Then my father walked into a Monday morning meeting and announced that Nate was my new boss. I smiled. I shook Nate's hand, and then I spent the next 60 days making absolutely certain that when I walked out that door, there would be nothing left worth staying for. 5 years later, I bought the company, and the first thing I did was call Nate into my office. Let me tell you who I was. Before any of this happened, I was 26 when I joined Callaway Regional Distribution, my father's company. Built over 30 years, about 80 employees, mid-size regional player, moving industrial supply contracts up and down the eastern seaboard. My father, Gerald Callaway, had been running it since before I was born. He was good at operations. He was not good at selling. When I came on, the sales division was 3 people, and a spreadsheet that hadn't been updated since 2019. Annual revenue from new contracts, $1.1 million. I know because I printed the report my first week and kept it in a folder. I am that kind of person. I rebuilt the division in 18 months. New CRM, new pipeline tracking, a commission structure that actually rewarded performance, and a hiring process that filtered for closers, not talkers. By the end of year 2, we had 11 people on the team, and new contract revenue was at $4.7 million. I was not paid accordingly. My base was $74,000. My commission brought it to just under $110,000 in a good year, which was every year because I made sure of it. I did not complain about the pay. I told myself it was equity in the future. Family company. Long game. That is what I told myself. And then Nate came back from his 3rd failed startup. Nate is 29 now, 4 years younger than me. He is charming in the way that people are charming when they have never had to be anything else. Our parents thought he was the visionary. He had ideas. He had energy. He had no follow-through whatsoever. But nobody in my family seemed to track that part. The first startup folded in 8 months. The second one lasted 14, mostly because Nate convinced our uncle to invest $60,000 that he never got back. The third one, I am still not entirely sure what it was. Something with an app, something with blockchain. It was gone by spring. Nate was 31 and broke, and my father called me on a Tuesday evening and said he wanted to bring Nate into the company. He wanted me to train him. He needs to learn the business, Maya. You know it better than anyone. Who better to show him the ropes? I said, sure. I said it without hesitating, because I genuinely thought I was helping. I want you to understand that. I thought I was being a good daughter and a good sister. I spent 4 months training Nate, not just the basics, everything. How I structured the pipeline, how I handled client relationships, the exact language I used on discovery calls, which clients needed hand-holding and which ones just wanted results. I introduced him personally to every major account. I told them Nate was our rising star. I said it. I used those words. By month 5, Nate had a title, Senior Sales Associate, and a salary of $85,000, which was more than I had made. At the same point in my tenure, I noticed. I said nothing. The Monday morning meeting was the last week of March. I remember the light in the conference room, the way it came in sideways off the parking lot. My father was standing at the head of the table, which was unusual. Gerald did not do Monday morning stand-ups. He said he had an announcement. He said the company was entering a new phase of growth and needed stronger leadership in sales. He said Nate had shown tremendous development, and that effective immediately, Nate would be stepping into the role of Vice President of Sales, my role, the role I had been doing for 3 years, without the title or the pay. He said I would be reporting to Nate. He said it the way you say something you have already decided and are only now informing the other person about. I looked at Nate. Nate looked at the table. He had the decency to look uncomfortable. That was the last time I saw that from him. I did not cry. I did not argue. I said congratulations, shook Nate's hand, and went back to my desk. I sat there for 11 minutes. I know because I watched the clock, and then I opened my personal laptop, which I kept in my bag, and I started forwarding emails. Not everything, not anything proprietary. Timelines, relationship notes, records of which deals I had originated, which clients had specifically requested to work with me, documentation, just in case. I am that kind of person. 2 days later, Nate called me into the corner office, his corner office now. He had already moved Gerald's plaques to the side credenza and put up a whiteboard with a pipeline funnel drawn on it in 4 different marker colors. He said he wanted to reset expectations. He said the division was going to be restructured. He said my base salary was being adjusted to $57,500, which was a 22% cut, effective the following pay period. He said my team would now report directly to him to streamline communication. He said my role was being refocused on relationship maintenance for existing accounts, not new business maintenance. He said it like he was doing me a favor, like he was protecting me from pressure. I looked at that whiteboard. I looked at the funnel he had drawn. It had 4 stages. The labels were wrong. I had built the actual funnel. I knew every stage. I said, Nate, you're cutting my salary by 22%. He said, it's a restructure, Maya. It's not personal, I said. Are you restructuring anyone else's salary? He said, this is a leadership decision. I said, okay, and I walked out. That was the moment I decided not to fight it, not to go to my father, not to cry or argue or threaten. I had 60 days before my non-compete window kicked in. If I resigned, 60 days from the salary change notice. I counted them that night on my kitchen calendar. I wrote the exit date in pencil, and then I got to work. I want to be precise about what I did in those 60 days, because I did not do anything wrong. I want that to be clear. I did not steal anything. I did not sabotage anything. I did not badmouth the company to anyone. What I did was finish every project I had started, serve every client at the highest possible level, document everything I had ever contributed, and quietly, carefully begin building what came next. Week 1, I retained an employment attorney. Her name was Diane Osei. She was 42, had 30 words or fewer in her vocabulary when clients tried to explain their feelings, and was absolutely surgical about contracts. I showed her my original employment agreement, the salary cut notice, and the restructure memo. She looked at them for about 4 minutes. Then she looked up at me and said, the salary reduction without written consent may constitute a material breach of your employment contract. If they trigger the non-compete, it may not be enforceable. I said, what do I need to document? She gave me a list. I started that night. Week 2, Nate began reassigning my accounts in the CRM, not client relationships, the CRM records. He was literally changing the originating rep field on deals I had closed, my name coming off deals I had built from cold calls, his name going on. I printed the old records. I had the original emails. I had the original contracts with my signature on the cover letters. I had voicemails. I had time-stamped texts from clients who had specifically said they came to Callaway because of me. Every single one of those I organized in a folder on my personal drive, 73 documents. I named the folder Reference Materials. Week 3, Nate held a team meeting and told my former team that the new direction was going to require a different kind of energy. He said this while wearing a jacket he had bought specifically for the role, I think, because I had never seen it before. 2 of my people came to my desk afterward. Marcus, who had been with me for 2 years, leaned against my cubicle partition and said quietly, Maya, what are you doing? I said, finishing what I started. He nodded slowly. He understood something, even if I hadn't said it. Week 4, I had 3 conversations that would eventually change everything. The first was with David Park, our biggest client, $840,000 annual contract. I had brought David in personally, cold called his assistant 4 times before I got through. We met for coffee that Thursday. I did not solicit him. I did not say anything about leaving. I said I wanted to make sure his account was in good hands through the transition period. He looked at me across his coffee cup and said, are you going somewhere, Maya? I said, I'm keeping my options open. He said, well, Wherever you land, call me first. The second conversation was with Linda Chen, our second largest account, $620,000. Same thing, different coffee shop, same end to the conversation. She said, "You're the reason we stayed, you know. After that pricing issue in 2022, I was going to pull the contract. You called me personally. You fixed it in 48 hours. Nate didn't even know about it." I said, "I know," she said. "Keep in touch." The third conversation was with Raymond Foster, a mid-size client, $310,000 contract, but rock solid, never late, always expanded scope when asked. Raymond just said, "Send me your personal email before you go." I had not told him I was going. People knew. By week 6, Nate had started making it harder to stay. I do not think it was intentional at first. I think he was just running on ego and inexperience and had no idea what he was doing. But the effect was the same. He reassigned my office to a new hire. He moved me to an open-floor workspace with no privacy for calls. He started scheduling client check-in calls, at times he knew conflicted with my existing commitments, and then CCing my father on the follow-up emails noting I had missed the call. He restructured my commission tier so that my existing accounts, the ones I had originated, would now pay at the maintenance rate, not the origination rate. The difference was roughly $30,000 annually. He called it standardizing the compensation model. My attorney called it constructive dismissal. She said that plainly on a Tuesday afternoon, sitting across from me at her desk, and then she said, "They're building a case to manage you out. The question is whether you want to wait for that or control your own exit." I said, "I want to control everything." She said, "Then here's what we do." Week 7. I registered an LLC, Callaway Independent, a clean name. Meridian Sales Partners. I registered it in my name, paid the filing fee myself, did it on a Saturday so it didn't touch company time. I opened a business bank account. I built a simple website. Nothing fancy, just a landing page with a contact form and a list of the sectors we served. I ordered business cards and left them in the trunk of my car. Week 8. I finished every single deliverable on my desk, every report, every client update, every internal briefing Nate had assigned me. I did it flawlessly, not because I owed them that, because I refused to give anyone a reason to say I had failed at anything. On day 59, I came into the office at 7 in the morning. While the building was still quiet, I sat at my desk for the last time. I went through my email one final time. I had already sent Diane everything she needed. I had already briefed the 3 clients, quietly, that I would be in touch soon. I had already said my private goodbyes to Marcus and 2 others who had already asked, unofficially, about coming with me. At 9:02 a.m., I walked into Nate's office. He looked up from his phone. I put an envelope on his desk. I said, "That's my resignation. Effective today. My notice period, as per my employment contract, is being waived per the salary modification clause. My attorney has the documentation. I wish you the best." Nate stared at the envelope. Then he looked up at me and said, "Maya, you're making a mistake." I said, "I've been making your career for 3 years, Nate. I think I know the difference." I picked up my bag. I walked out. I did not look back. The first call I made from the parking lot was to David Park. He picked up on the second ring. He said, "That was fast." I said, "I move quickly when I'm ready." By end of business that day, David Park had sent me a letter of intent to transfer his contract to Meridian Sales Partners. Linda Chen called me the next morning. Before I had even made coffee, she said, "I heard you left. What do I do to follow you?" Raymond Foster took 2 days. He's more deliberate, but he got there. 3 clients, $1.77 million in annual contract value, out the door with me. To be completely accurate, they followed me because they chose to. I did not poach them. I did not sign them before I left. I did not say a single negative word about Callaway Regional to any of them. They had my personal contact information, and they used it. That is what happens when you actually do the work. For 3 years, Callaway Regional sent a cease and desist 10 days after I resigned, citing the non-compete. Diane read it, sent back a 12-page response, and attached the salary modification notice, the restructure memo, and the employment contract clause that explicitly required written consent for any compensation change. She also attached a note detailing every constructive dismissal action taken against me in the final weeks. The cease and desist died. I never heard back. My father called me once. He said, "Maya, this is not how family does things." I said, "Dad, you made Nate my boss without a conversation. You cut my salary without asking. I spent 3 years building that division. I would have stayed forever if you had just talked to me." He said, "Nate needed the opportunity." I said, "I know. And I needed a father. We both got something different than we expected." I hung up. I did not call back for 4 months, and during those 4 months, I built Meridian. Year 1 was hard. I will not pretend otherwise. Marcus came with me 6 weeks after I left, brought 2 junior reps with him. We operated out of my spare bedroom for the first 3 months. I paid Marcus and the 2 juniors before I paid myself. Some weeks that meant I did not pay myself. I ate a lot of pasta. I learned what every expense actually cost when there was no company card, but I also learned what I was actually worth when there was no ceiling on it. By the end of year 1, Meridian had $2.4 million in annual contract revenue. The 3 founding clients had all expanded scope. We had added 4 new accounts. Year 2, $4.1 million. We moved into a real office. I hired 2 more reps. I paid myself $180,000 and felt like it was not enough, and then laughed at myself, because I remembered when $110,000 felt like the ceiling. Year 3, $6.8 million. I won a regional business award, my name in a trade publication, a photo of me in front of our office. My father texted me the article. No message, just the link. I stared at it for a while. Then I said thanks. Year 4, we crossed $9 million. I started paying attention to something else, something I had been tracking quietly for a couple of years. Callaway Regional Distribution, my father's company, the one I had built the sales division for, the one that had $4.7 million in new contract revenue the year I left. The year after I left, $2.1 million. The year after that, $900,000. By year 4 post-departure, Callaway Regional was in trouble. Real trouble. Nate had expanded the team aggressively, burned through the margin, lost 2 of their next 3 biggest accounts to competitors, and made a vendor deal that went sideways and cost the company $340,000 in penalties. My father, to his credit, had tried to course correct. He'd moved Nate sideways into a strategy role, which is what you call a role when you can't fire your son, but can't let him keep doing damage. But the damage was done. I heard through a former colleague that they were looking for outside investment or a buyer. I called my father in the spring of year 5. I had not called him in a while. Our relationship had thawed, slowly, the way cold things do when you stop fighting them. He knew what I had built. He did not say he was proud often, but he said it once, at my brother's birthday dinner 2 years prior, quietly. When Nate was in the other room, he said, "You turned out to be exactly what I thought you were." I said, "I know, Dad." He said, "I should have protected that." I said, "You should have." We did not hug, but we had that. Now I called him on a Tuesday morning, and I said, "Dad, I want to buy the company." Silence, long silence. Then, "Maya," I said, "I know what it's worth right now. I know what the books look like. I'm not here to lowball you. I want to give you a fair number. Take care of your retirement and do right by the people who are still there. But I need full operational control. No conditions, no carve-outs." He said, "What about Nate?" I said, "That's not a condition I'm negotiating on, Dad." The silence that time was longer. He said, "He's your brother." I said, "I know who he is. What I'm asking is whether you want to save the company or protect the org chart." The acquisition took 4 months to close. Diane handled the legal. I brought in a financial advisor and an independent appraiser. We paid my father a number I won't repeat here, but it was fair. It was more than the market would have given him from anyone else who looked at those books. He signed. We shook hands across a conference table, and my father looked at me with an expression I could not fully read. Not pride, not shame, something older than both of those. He said, "Run it right." I said, "That's all I've ever done." I became CEO of Callaway Regional Distribution on a Thursday in October. I spent the first week walking the floor, meeting the people who had stayed. There were 51 employees employees left. There had been 80 when I joined 9 years earlier. 51 people who had hung on. Through the reorganizations, the vendor debacle, the lost accounts, the uncertainty. I learned every name. I told them, new direction, same mission. Nobody loses their job in the next 90 days, except by choice. I meant it. On day 8, I called Nate into the office, not the corner office with the whiteboard. I had moved into a different space. Nate came in wearing a good jacket, still with the jackets. He sat down across from me. He looked older. He had not had an easy few years. I could see that. I felt something about that. Not guilt, not satisfaction exactly. Something quieter. I said, Nate, I want to be straight with you, he said. I figured this was coming, I said. Your role here is being eliminated. The strategy position isn't something we're carrying forward. You'll receive a severance package, 12-week space, full benefits through the period. It's fair. It's more than fair. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, you could have kept me on. I know the business, I said. You knew it. But Nate, you had years to learn it properly. You had me right there for 4 months, showing you everything. And the first thing you did with that knowledge was cut my salary and take my team. He said, Dad told me to restructure. I said, Dad told you to lead. There's a difference. You could have called me. You could have said, look, this is uncomfortable. How do we make it work? You didn't. He said nothing. I said, I want you to land somewhere good, Nate. I genuinely mean that. You're not a bad person. You're just not the right person for this company. You never were. He stood up. He shook my hand. He was 3 inches taller than me and 10 years behind me, and we both knew it. He said, you know what the worst part is? I said, what? He said, you're exactly as good as you always said you were. I said, I know. He left. I sat in that office for a while, the same building where I had once sat for 11 minutes, watching the clock. The morning my father took everything from me. I was not gloating. I want to be clear about that. There was no celebration in it, just something solid, like a foundation settling. In the first fiscal year under Meridian management, Callaway Regional returned to $3.8 million in new contract revenue. Year 2 under my leadership, $5.6 million. Marcus is VP of Sales now. He earned it in a way I recognized. The 51 employees became 64. My father came to the company holiday party that winter. He stood near the edge of the room and watched people laugh and eat, and he found me at some point and said, this is what it should have looked like. I said, yeah. It is. Nate got a sales manager role at a competing firm in another state. I heard he's doing okay. Steadier work. Less pressure. Maybe that's what he needed all along. I don't think about it much. What I think about is this. I spent 3 years building something that belonged to me and watching other people get the credit for it. I spent 60 days making sure that when I left on my terms. And I spent 5 years building something that nobody could take because it had my name on it from the very first day. The company my father built over 30 years, I did not destroy it. I bought it back and I run it the way it always should have been run. That is the only revenge worth having. Not the kind that burns something down, the kind that builds something better, right on top of the rubble. I trained him to do the job. Turns out, I trained myself for the one I actually deserved.